So far, DOGE has been a dud. According to the New York Times, the secretive quasi-governmental agency led by Elon Musk and tasked with taking the sledgehammer to the bloated federal government has been plagued by errors, omissions, and plain old dishonesty. According to the New York Times, DOGE claimed it saved $8 billion in one contract. Turns out it was just $8 million. Now, the Times reports that DOGE is taking credit for slashing grants and programs that actually expired years ago. The reports say DOGE then deleted a lot of those erroneous claims. But when the New York Times found more, the self-described free speech absolutist Musk and DOGE responded by trying to hide the receipts. Quote, that shift was a major step back from one of Mr. Musk's core promises about his group, that it would be maximally transparent. The website is the only place where this very powerful group has given a public accounting of its work. That accounting is still incomplete. It itemizes only a fraction of the money that the group claims to have saved, $115 billion as of Wednesday. So DOGE has appeared to have no impact whatsoever on the $36 trillion and rising national debt. But the impact on thousands of federal workers who have lost their jobs has been real, as is the potential impact to the functioning of the country. Proposed cuts to the FAA come at a time when the agency is running on fumes and travelers are skittish about airline safety. Or how about cuts to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration? They're tasked with tracking hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and other severe weather. According to the AP, the agency also, quote, manages the country's fisheries, runs marine sanctuaries, provides navigation information to ships, and observes changes in the climate and oceans. It also plays a role in warning about avalanches and space weather that could damage the electrical grid. It helps respond to disasters, including oil spills. It sounds like a lack of preparation for those events might cost the country far more in cleanup than it would save on the front end. If DOGE really wants to make a dent, it would appear that it is looking in all the wrong places. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, nearly 80% of the federal budget goes toward Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, defense, veterans and retiree benefits, and interest on the debt. DOGE, targeting agencies like USAID and NOAA, is nibbling around the edges and saving taxpayers fractions of pennies on the dollar. Now, Elon Musk has talked openly about cuts to health care programs and Social Security. That's the true third rail of politics. Remember what happened when President George W. Bush proposed to morph the entitlement program into private savings accounts. There's a reason nobody ever brought that up again. Americans love the notion of wielding the axe to that bloated, lazy, wasteful, fraudulent federal government, but they tend not to want to touch the items that the bulk of their taxes go toward. Health care, a stable retirement that they've paid into, a strong defense, and we sort of have to pay those other obligations like interest on the debt. So it begs the question, what is DOGE really after? Musk shot down reports that his company Starlink is looking to take a $2.4 billion telecom contract with the FAA, which would have been like Mike Madigan bringing in his tax law firm to write Illinois' tax code. Look, the United States faces an existential threat with its unsustainable and shocking debt numbers. Every year, under Republicans and Democrats, the government spends far, far more than what it takes in revenue and puts the rest on the credit card. Credit President Trump for shining a light on a problem nobody in Washington has had the courage to tackle. Turns out DOGE so far is not the solution. And that's our opening shot.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Growing protests over the detention of Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil. Could Illinois become the first state in the country to legalize prostitution? We have both sides of the debate. Paris on Politics is next.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Welcome to Paris on Politics, where we go behind the headlines and beyond the spin. President Trump is testing the limits of the First Amendment and the country's deportation policies as the federal government is currently detaining Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil. This because Khalil, a Palestinian and Syrian native on a U.S. green card, led several student protests against Israel and support of Palestine. Trump officials have said without evidence that Khalil is a Hamas supporter and acknowledges he's not being detained for committing any crime, but under a law that gives the U.S. Secretary of State this power.
Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Secretary of State has the right to revoke a green card or a visa for individuals who serve or are adversarial to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States of America. And Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges. And he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists, Hamas terrorists who have killed innocent men, women, and children. This is an individual who organized group protests that not only disrupted college campus classes and harassed Jewish American students and made them feel unsafe on their own college campus, but also distributed pro-Hamas propaganda, flyers with the logo of Hamas.
And joining us now are Ed Yanka, Communications Director of the ACLU of Illinois, and Ahmed Rehab, Executive Director of the Chicago Office of the Council on American Islamic Relations. We should note we extended an invite to a representative of the Trump administration as well as the Israeli consulate and the Anti-Defamation League, but they either declined or did not respond. We are glad you're here. Mr. Rehab, is there evidence that Mr. Khalil was somehow supporting Hamas or some kind of Hamas sleeper agent?
There is no evidence of that. The only evidence we have is of a young man who's standing up for his people against genocide, against death and destruction, dispossession, against maiming. And so he joins many Americans, Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, as well as Jews and others who are standing against this genocide. And because of that stance, he was targeted. And because of that stance, he was delegitimized and essentially abducted and detained, and now God knows what's going to happen.
And the Trump administration has admitted there is no criminal act that they believe he has taken. Ed Yanka, what is this obscure law under the Secretary of State that Ms. Leavitt was referring to there?
It is a portion and sort of a McCarthy-era relic in the United States that was intended to, quote, fight communism or fight the Reds or things like that. What it really is really a broadside on the First Amendment to our Constitution. We always should remind people that the First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees the freedom of speech, not simply to American citizens, but literally to anyone who is here. In this case, a lawful permanent resident, who, by the way, is not a lawful permanent resident because he came to study, but because he married an American citizen.
We should mention that his wife is an American citizen and they have a baby on the way.
So even the descriptions that are coming from the White House are, don't add up to what is actually happening in Mr. Khalil's case. And, beyond that, this is really more of, the promises, the kind of outsized language, the claims that Donald Trump made during the campaign, which are really designed not just to curb protests about the Gaza-Israeli conflict, but candidly, to curb all protests on college campuses. Donald Trump doesn't care about Mahmoud Khalil, and he doesn't really care about Columbia University, I suppose, unless they didn't let him in. But what he really cares about is there aren't people protesting against his immigration policies, his trans policies, or his DEI policies on college campuses across the country. And this is really just another evidence of him trying to be a king.
Well, what do we know right now, Ahmed Rehab, about Mr. Khalil's situation? Where is he and what is his status?
We know that he's in this limbo. There's been a court hearing, and obviously his attorneys are trying to fight back this abduction, right, and this very extrajudicial and illegal way of dealing with a person who is expressing his freedom of speech in this country. This is about the ruler, quote unquote, right, the king who was supposed to be a president, thinking that he has the right to determine what any student in America can believe and can say, what generally held beliefs they can have and express. This is what this is truly about, and it's very scary because it goes to the very heart of what makes us America, the freedom of expression, the freedom of conscience. Just recently, J.D. Vance himself from the White House was lecturing European leaders about the need to allow for freedom of speech and expression in Europe, and wagging his fingers mostly on behalf of the right-wing narratives in Europe, which is fine. But here he comes along, and this is the same White House and the same president that not too long ago stood with the protesters, quote unquote, the ones who were violent in attacking the Capitol Hill. And he said they were great patriots. But here you have a young American to be saying that I stand with my people against genocide, and he's the one that we have to chuck out of this country.
We should note that in Mr. Khalil's case, a couple different things. First of all, once his legal team was assembled that now includes lawyers from the ACLU national office and the New York affiliated the ACLU, they quickly removed him from New York to Louisiana, making it harder for him to meet with his counsel and to see his family. Yesterday, or I'm sorry, on Wednesday, when the court hearing took place, the government had to admit that despite the fact that Ms. Leavitt, the President of the United States, the Secretary of State have all talked about his case publicly, he had not yet even been able to meet with a lawyer. That seems to have finally happened. But what we see is, again, this sort of someone who's not accused of a crime, someone for which there is no evidence that they have conspired in any way to commit a crime, and yet they're being punished and separated in this way, even from legal counsel.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
On one side of their mouth, they're sort of saying, yes, you can't do this unless there is due process. But on the other side of their mouth, in a full-throated way, they're supporting what this administration is doing, coming after this young man.
Nothing beats a Chicago sunrise, but with our busy lives, it's easy to miss. Good Day Chicago won't waste your time. We don't produce our news out of New York. We are live, local. All Chicago, all the time, starting at 4:30. Watch or listen live, however you get ready to seize the day. Anytime, anywhere. On TV or Fox Local. Weekday mornings on Fox 32, Chicago.
I like this soldier,
He just ran into a door.
but at least he ran.
Welcome to Stroop Store.
General Davidson sent me here as a punishment.
How is Stroopsdorf a punishment?
You're named after a waffle.
Going Dutch, all new Thursdays on Fox and anytime on Hulu.
All right, well, I want to read a statement from the Anti-Defamation League on this case. They say, quote, "We firmly believe there should be swift and severe consequences for those who provide material support to foreign terrorist organizations, incite violence in support of terrorist activities, or conceal their identities in order to harass and intimidate Jewish individuals and institutions with impunity. We appreciate the Trump administration's broad, bold set of efforts to counter campus anti-Semitism, and this action further illustrates that resolve by holding alleged perpetrators responsible for their actions. Obviously, any deportation action or revocation of a green card or visa must be undertaken in alignment with required due process. We also hope that this action serves as a deterrent to others who might consider breaking the law on college campuses or anywhere." A bit of a hedging or cryptic statement there from the Anti-Defamation League, which does call out civil rights abuses, and they've focused specifically on it, anti-Semitism. But Ahmed Rehab, have universities effectively handled this as part of the problem that perhaps the Trump administration is coming in here to set an example because they don't like the way universities handle it?
There is this chilling factor, this scorched earth approach by this administration that has targeted universities as it has targeted student protesters and civil rights organizations. And in terms of this statement, I have to say, which is rather weak, on one side of their mouth, they're sort of saying, yes, you can't do this unless there is due process. But on the other side of their mouth, in a full-throated way, they're supporting what this administration is doing, coming after this young man. And you see this in the very beginning. You see the contradiction. They're saying material support for terrorism cannot stand. Well, I agree with that. But we're not looking at that here. He's not being charged with that here. If that were the case, there would be a crime that he would be charged with. Instead, what we're seeing is retaliation through the immigration system, weaponizing ICE to punish somebody who's gone through the system legally in order to penalize him for his beliefs. And I'll close with this on this point. Zionism in this country is increasingly becoming the sort of thing that you can't talk about and criticize. And that's the elephant in the room. Not a lot of people are willing to say that, but we need to start having this conversation. You can critique and criticize America, but you can't criticize Israel, Zionism. That's what this is about.
And certainly there was a proposed federal law to that effect that hasn't gone anywhere, but certainly that is a larger issue, and we do want to have conversations on that. But with Mr. Khalil, what is his due process right now? We understand a judge has blocked the deportation as this plays out, but how does due process work in this situation?
Well, I think ultimately what will happen is that there will be a full hearing, an evidentiary hearing, at which the government will have to actually state the reasons why they're seeking to deport him. And when they do that, I think it'll underscore the weakness of this, and that the fact he's just being punished for his speech, which will allow a federal judge to block it. I think the other 2 points that I'd want to make beyond what happens to Mr. Khalil is that the administration says that this is just the beginning of this. This is just the beginning. And they've said that a number of different times, even since Mr. Khalil was detained. And so I think that all of us should be concerned about that. And I would suggest this will not stop with simply criticizing the state of Israel or their actions. If you can do this to people, if you can criminalize speech, it will not stop with that speech. It will be anybody's speech who ultimately will be criminalized. I think that's what the real danger here is because then what we can't do is even criticize the United States. And that's what Donald Trump really wants, is for nobody to be able to criticize him.
All right, well, we know the ACLU is an organization that is focused on those issues, as well as yours. Med Rehab and Ed Yanka, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Paris.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Could Illinois become the first state in the country to legalize prostitution? We have both sides of the debate.
Welcome to Lucky Season 13 of The Masked Singer.
Oh my God! I didn't think this show would get any crazier.
You guys are all a bunch of quacks.
Having a hard time breathing.
Try putting your arms above your head.
Up, Robin.
The Masked Singer Lucky Season 13 is all new Wednesdays on Fox and watch anytime on Hulu.
Illinois could become the first state in the nation to legalize prostitution or sex work. The Sex Work Bill of Rights Act would legalize an industry that operates underground, and it would provide worker protections to those involved in sex work. Supporters say it is essential for those workers' safety.
Violence is not inherent in the sex trades, but criminalization has forced sex workers underground, where the lack of workplace protections, safety measures, and workers' rights make them vulnerable to abuse. We must recognize that the complex and interconnected factors such as poverty, racism, misogyny, and weak worker protections fuel both labor and sex trafficking.
And joining us now is one of the bill's sponsors, State Representative Will Guzzardi from Chicago and Republican Representative Nicole Laha from Lamont. Thanks for being here. Representative Guzzardi, sex work was reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor in 2013. Why go this extra step and decriminalize it?
Well, I think the real driver for our introducing this measure this year is that there's an ongoing epidemic of violence against sex workers in my district, in the city of Chicago, and across the state of Illinois and around the country. And keeping our communities safe is one of my highest priorities as a legislator. And this violence is particularly targeted against women and women of color, and we have to do something about it. And there's one proven intervention that's taken place around the world that has demonstrated that it will keep sex workers safe and that it will reduce trafficking and violence against women, and that's decriminalizing adult consensual sex work. Our bill doesn't touch coercion, violence. Those things are wrong. No one should be forced into the sex trade. Human trafficking is a tremendous concern, and we need to focus our resources on going after trafficking. But two adults engaging in consensual activity together, government has no business getting in the way of that kind of activity. And by criminalizing it, we're only driving it into the shadows and leaving people susceptible to trafficking and violence.
All right, Representative Laha, will this make communities safer, and is this the right way to go?
Well, although I respect Representative Guzzardi's intention with this bill, I think it's important that we stick with the facts and not feelings. And what we know to be true here in Illinois, this bill as written is a very bad idea. My time in the General Assembly has led me to work on a number of bills to combat human trafficking and give victims and prosecutors the tools they need to bring traffickers to justice. And, to see that any of the organizations that I work with personally, who work with survivors of human trafficking, have yet to support this bill as written, I think is very telling.
All right, what about that, Representative Guzzardi, that to go after human trafficking, this wouldn't be the most effective way? I mean, how would this bill crack down on human trafficking and just make people safe from being coerced or forced?
Well, the trouble is that when people who are engaged in the sex trade are victims of violence or trafficking or coercion, they're often reluctant to go to law enforcement about it because they're afraid of the consequences for themselves, that they're afraid that they're going to get caught up with the charge and the impacts that will have on their lives and their family and their kids and their community. So that's why so much of the violence and trafficking against sex workers goes unreported, because the survivors just don't want to go to law enforcement about it. So that's why we feel like this is a really important tool. And that's why many national anti-trafficking organizations have endorsed this bill, along with groups like Equality Illinois and advocates like the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, organizations that are really trying to keep our communities safe and protect human rights. That's why there's so many of those organizations and coalition behind this legislative effort.
All right, Representative Laha, it's a misdemeanor now. We know this work is going on. If it is going on, it's going to go on whether it's legal or illegal. Why not take this extra step to just bring it out of the shadows?
Well, I think it is our job as legislators to protect women and children and to strengthen laws that do that. We know here in Illinois that most people don't start in prostitution of their free will. We also know that this doesn't start as adults. The average age of trafficking victimization starts at 12 to 13 years old. I feel that if we do normalize prostitution and legalize it, it's a disservice to those people who just never wanted to be there in the first place.
What about that, Representative Guzzardi? Will this protect minors? Clearly, obviously, it would still be a felony if minors are coerced into this kind of activity, correct?
That's right, of course. And I agree with Representative Laha. And I want to also commend her on her tremendous work in the legislature. I know we're on opposite sides of the aisle, but she's done great work in a number of areas, including protecting victims of human trafficking. But both the data from jurisdictions around the world that have taken this step, in Australia where they decriminalized sex work, they saw rates of violence against sex workers decline and rates of human trafficking decline. And here again, I think this is because we're taking this work out of the shadows. And we really are focused with this bill specifically on adult consensual sex work. And it's important for me to reiterate that, because that's the kind of activity that I believe government has no role regulating. Coercion, sexual encounters with minors, these are wrong, these are criminal, they will stay criminal under our law, and they should be. And that's what law enforcement should be focused on. They should be dedicating their resources to going after the people who are trafficking kids, because that's wrong. But to adults who are engaging in consensual sexual activity, we have no business dedicating our time and resources to trying to police that.
And arrests, since this became a misdemeanor, they dropped 97% just for sex work or prostitution. So essentially the police stopped policing it. Representative Laha, what would be in your mind the better way to go? Should this just stay a misdemeanor, or are there other avenues that the legislature can take?
Well, I definitely think victim protections is huge. I completely agree with Representative Guzzardi in letting victims know that they have a voice, they have people they can trust in the legislature, and that's what a lot of my legislation aims, is for victim protection, letting people know that they're not defined by a situation they might find themselves in. And so I think, as far as bills, when they come to legislation, making sure we're giving more tools to victims, I think is extremely crucial here. Some of the concerns that we are seeing when it comes to this particular bill is this bill will be giving labor rights, which we feel could further lead to victimization and use of financial control and abuse. This bill, embodies criminals to further victimize and promote human trafficking. So not to mention that we might be normalizing this, and we're opening a very dangerous Pandora's box in catering to this cycle of victimization and exploitation.
What about that? I want to give you a chance to respond to that before we wrap up here. Representative Guzzardi, could it expand this industry, giving folks workers' rights? Could it lead more people into this industry? And perhaps lead to more trouble, like victimization against some of the sex workers?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a fundamental disagreement between myself and Representative Laha. My belief is that when you give labor rights and worker protections to more workers, it keeps them safer. It doesn't put them in further jeopardy. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing the Republican Party in this state and nationally trying to erode labor rights to take advantage of workers, and I just don't think that's the right way for us to go. But fundamentally, my belief about this issue is that adults should be able to engage in consensual sexual activity without government interference. And people who are being coerced and trafficked and forced through violence to engage in sexual activity, that's a crime and it should remain a crime. And that's all our bill does, and I think it's a really important step forward for our state.
Okay, Representative Will Guzzardi and Nicole Laha, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And that's our show for this week. Stay up to date on all the news you need to know at fox32chicago.com and the Fox Local app, and we'll see you next time. So long, everyone.
The cartel has taken enough from me. I want what's mine. I was a surgeon in Manila. I want to help people again. I want to be a cartel doctor.
Weren't you the cleaning lady?
I've changed.
I need you to keep him alive.
What did you do to him? This is sick.
This is survival.
This can pull you deeper into the cartel. I have no choice. I need to protect my family.
The Cleaning Lady returns Tuesday, March 25th on Fox.